If you're an international graduate student, at some point you're going to have to figure out how to navigate the dissertation process when the language that you're expected to write and defend in is not your native one. You're going to learn some tips for how to do that right now. Hi everybody, I'm Leigh from teachingacademia.com, and I'm all about giving you the tips and tools you need to navigate academia and make your best impact. Today we have a return guest, Dr. Raul A. Mora. He's going to be talking to us about what it takes to be a successful international graduate student when you hit the dissertation phase, and he's got some great tips for you that you're not going to want to miss. So let's head over and hear what he has to say. All right, everybody, thank you for joining us. I'm really excited today. We have back with us again Dr. Raul A. Mora. Raul, hello. How are you?
Hi, Leigh. It's good to be back. It's doing great. Happy to be back.
It's great to have you. Raul is an associate professor of English Ed and Literacy Studies at UPB in Medellin, Colombia, and you might remember him from an earlier video that we had on the show talking about how to succeed as an international grad student. I'm going to have a card popping up right now that you can click on if you haven't seen that video or you just want a refresher. Today, we're going to be talking about how you navigate the dissertation stage as a grad student when you're in a country where you don't speak, well, you do speak the native language, but you're doing that in a language that is not your native language. There we go. I got that down. So, Raul, you've got some tips for us because you did this, right? You are Colombian, but you did your dissertation in the U.S. English was not your native language, but you navigated the whole thing. You did so very well. You were very successful. So what is it that people need to know if they find themselves as an international grad student and now they've hit the dissertation phase?
Well, first of all, if you made it to the dissertation stage, give yourself a big hug and a big pat on the back because you were able to really succeed and to thrive in passing all the different stages that are part of the doctoral program. So if you got it to this stage, feel good that you have made a lot of progress and be ready for the road ahead. Now, I would say in order to prepare for the whole dissertation stage, my first tip would be start to prepare early. And by early, I mean even before you start the doctoral program. Because sometimes there are international students who kind of hope that once I get to the US or whatever, or abroad, my language is just going to improve by itself and pretty much magically because I'm there. And that doesn't necessarily apply. Because once you get into the country, you have to understand that there are all these other issues. I mean, we mentioned some of them in the first video, that you also have to deal with cultural aspects, and you have to deal with filing taxes, and you have to deal with getting sick and having to see a doctor, and or having an accident, or traveling, visas, and there are all these little things that may chip away time from your desire to practice the language. So I would say, how early should you start? My answer is as soon as you have made up your mind that you want to go to grad school. So the road to the dissertation begins the day you say, back home, I think I would like to try this PhD thing. That's when the road begins. That's when the preparation begins. That's when you want to get really serious about working very hard on your language. So by the time you get into the country, you already have enough command of the language that you can deal with the basics of your everyday life, and you can focus really on learning the academic stuff, because probably that's my part you might not be able to grasp abroad completely, but that will be the one you can grasp when you're here. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, I was gonna say, I think there's an important distinction here because I know that there are students that will show up and they think that they're supposed to know what their dissertation is going to be about, right? And,
oh, no,
and
no,
that's,
no, no.
And I always tell them no, and that's not what you're saying. When you say start preparing, you're not saying when you walk in the doors, you need to know exactly what your dissertation is going to be. You're talking about
no.
language, which is, I think, is a really important distinction. You're talking about just being prepared for the language.
Yeah, absolutely not, because I mean, because anyway, even if you, because the reality of the dissertation is, even if you have a plan, even if you have a very well thought out plan of what you would really think you want to do, that is going to change once you start the doctoral program. That is going to change, and obviously that is a normal ebb and flow. You can have a very clear idea on year one, but by the time you finish, you're gonna go back to your notes and like, oh, this took in a whole different direction. It's more into having all the language you need to get here and start your program, and then use the time that you would need otherwise to like get into the language intricacies of the culture. Devote them to study, to really understand what a doctorate and understand what the dissertation is, which brings me to the second point, which is once you're in the doctoral program, start to learn about the source materials. And I think one of the key elements when you want to look at other people's dissertations. I mean, they're all available online these days. I mean, it's not like you can find them on the repositories. So I would say look at other people's dissertations. Look at dissertations from former student of your advisors. I mean, look at what they wrote and how they wrote it. And that way you get yourself familiarized with the material and you get yourself familiarized with the structure. The dissertation as a genre is a very particular genre that is, it's very similar. It has some connections. It has some links to academic articles or peer-reviewed journal articles. But for example, a dissertation is very different from a book. A dissertation is in fact when you look at overall, the dissertation is very different from a journal. It may share some similarities in terms of the basic structure, but the way or the space you have to present the ideas and the length and the latitude you have to present your ideas is going to be much bigger than a dissertation. So you need to understand the dissertation as a genre in and of itself.
And I think too, when you do that, right, you start to see what does your advisor expect too, right, for a dissertation. When you start looking through past dissertations that that person has graduated, and I know you said it's its own genre, which it absolutely is. My advisor was very clear that she didn't do traditional dissertations. She did non-traditional. So you could do a book or you could do a collection of articles. But if you want to do a traditional dissertation, you should go find somebody else. So you get to learn, those things too and start thinking about what's right for you.
Absolutely. I mean, the more you get the ground rules, I mean, and especially because sometimes there are cases where for multiple reasons you may have to change advisors or dissertation directors. Some of the ground rules may change. So it's always important to know the game you're playing. Another important piece of advice, definitely be in touch with senior international students, especially ones who are dissertating or become very, very close to an international assistant professor who just finished. I mean, that was my case. I had a very good friend who's now in San Antonio, and we had a lot of conversations over lunch where he gave me a lot of useful advice on the lit review, and it was very casual, very informal, but it was like, it's always nice to hear the perspective of someone who just finished and who's an international student or someone who had to navigate the second language issue as well. That always try to get that perspective. So don't fall into the trap of just isolating yourself from everybody, because that sometimes dissertators tend to do that. Keep track of your international students who are doing the work, and learn from them and ask them what's going on. And they don't necessarily have to show you the draft, but at least get an idea of what the experience looks like in terms of dealing with the language. I would bring a third point that I would like to call it like this. Plagiarism is wrong, but imitation isn't necessarily a bad thing. And let me elaborate. I mean, when I say plagiarism, no, you don't want to plagiarize, period. I mean, but sometimes even advanced researchers, sometimes we tend to imitate or tend to look at the style of others and borrow an idea or two, borrow the style. And I would say there is one part of the dissertation that you can use to your advantage, and it's the lit review. The lit review, you have to read hundreds of articles. Sometimes it ranges going to the thousands of articles in order to pick the cream of the crop for your chapter 2. Look at what, and then occasionally there are certain scholars whose work you really admire, and you start collecting their writing. Look at what they do. I mean, a lot of writers draw inspiration from others. I mean, that's documented. How many people, how many writers say, "Oh yeah, I drew inspiration from Hemingway," or "I drew inspiration from Shakespeare," or "I drew inspiration," and there's nothing wrong with that. They're not copying the work, but they're saying, reading Shakespeare, reading Faulkner, reading anybody. Let me just pop in my mind, because Garcia Marquez mentioned that. He said Hemingway, in a way, influences writing. And there's and if you read Garcia Marquez, has a very unique style, but you can see that he acknowledges his influences, and like it happens to musicians. Sometimes musicians draw inspiration from other musicians, and they use that to develop their style. So I don't see anything wrong as an academic to say, yeah, there are certain scholars whose work are informing my research.
Well, I think you pay attention to style and tone and structure, and you use those to inform your writing. And I always tell people too, like, think about what you're weakest in. So, for example, for me, when I was getting started, I couldn't write a data analysis section to save my life. Like, they were terrible. And so I had to go out and find, like, who writes these in ways that resonate with me. And then start modeling, it's not plagiarizing, but it's really doing an analysis of how these people are writing their sections, and then figuring out how do I translate that into my own work. And yeah, that's great advice.
Yeah, and I think if you want to go deeper, then look for the work of like international scholars who are writing in English as a second language, and if you look at what they do, look at how they write. And use that modeling as a way to gain the necessary confidence to continue your path to writing. Because sometimes, as an international student, sometimes we lose confidence because, we're always with this idea that English is not my language, and there is you have that little devil on your shoulder always whispering, "Yeah, but English is your second language. English is your second language. English is your second language. So big deal." You can develop a style that is you, but inspired by the people you're reading. Because I mean, again, you're gonna read a lot of people, and we all have 2 or 3 scholars or 1 or 2 theoreticians whose work has informed our career. So look at what they did, and play with that, and take it from there, and give yourself the chance to write. And also, I would say, I always tell the students that maybe a dissertation is something you may have to do by yourself, but you don't have to do it alone.
Right.
And most universities in the world, they have resources for doctoral students. And I'd say one that helped me a lot when I was doing my own dissertation was going to workshops at the Writing Center at the University of Illinois. Because I remember I went to 2 sessions, and I remember exactly what we did. I just brought a draft, and it's not that the person at the Writing Center was correcting my draft, but he was like, this was someone who's working on his PhD in English. And this person I remember very well, he sat with me for 2 hours, and he showed me how to edit my sentences to make them shorter, to work with the economy of language that is so important in English. And he showed me how to edit. He showed me, like, let's look at this sentence, and this is how you can write it shorter. And I started using that, and I still do to this day. When I'm doing the revisions, I do a lot of self-editing, and I think that I learned that when I went to the Writing Center. So I'd say if you're an international student, that is a good place to go. Because in a Writing Center, you're not just going to have, it's not just because they're native speakers, but these are people who are studying to become writers, or people who are working on doctoral degrees in writing studies or in English, or people who are experts in the language and who can give you sound advice. Because one of the things you want to learn when you're writing your own work is to be able to do a lot of the editing on your own. Because you cannot expect to find someone who's going to copy edit a 200-page manuscript. Sometimes you're lucky enough to find someone who's friends with you and can do it, but sometimes you have to do it on your own, and you have to learn. So I say take advantage of those resources, ask questions. Don't necessarily go there though, I want you to proofread my paper, but more and go and tell them to teach you how to proofread your paper. Because we talk about a lot of proofreading. I mean, that's a word we use all the time. You have to proof your papers. You have to proof your papers. But the question is, how often do we teach people how to proofread?
And I think that's important, because it's, if I give you my paper and you proofread it for me, that might improve the quality of my paper. But I still can't proofread it on my own. I still don't have those skills on my own to apply. And that's really what you want. You want someone to teach you how to do that.
Exactly. And so take advantage of those services. Again, in most universities have them, and they're in many cases they're free. So I mean, it's like basically a shameless plug. This is like considered a shameless plug into every writing center at every university in the U.S. It's like, yeah, telling all international students, go there, because that they're there for you. I mean, and if you, the resource is there. There is absolutely no shame. There is no feeling of guilt if you go and look for someone at a writing center to give you advice. Some of the writing centers are actually bringing international scholars to help them gear their work into helping second language writers. So use that resource. Because writing is difficult anyway. And writing a dissertation is, regardless of your command of the language, is going to be difficult, because there are a lot of things you have to negotiate. There are a lot of things you have to navigate. There are a lot of things you have to deal with in terms of style, in terms of formatting, in terms of the content, in terms of the limits, that getting yourself familiar with the material, as I said first, it's important. I mean, you cannot just come to the dissertation completely blindfolded, because you're gonna struggle. So you need to know what you're going up against. You need to know what this is going to look like, and definitely ask all the questions you need to ask to your advisor, to your mentors. Ask them all and that's another important thing. Ask questions. Ask all the questions. Nobody's going to make you feel, or nobody should make you feel guilty if you're asking a million questions. Because when you're a student, that's what you're there for. You're there to learn.
And that's our job.
Exactly.
That's our job.
Exactly. Our job is to tell you how to improve this, to tell you how to fix this, to give you some guidance, to give you some ideas, to throw some readings in your direction. That's what your professors and your advisors are supposed to do in the first place.
And to answer your questions.
And answer your questions. And usually, and more often, and many times you're going to have advisors telling you, when you look at this dissertation, and use it as a starting point. I mean, even sometimes when you have like mid-career scholars, sometimes you go and go look at the dissertation just to see what they, it would be an interesting exercise. If you have someone whose work you really like, go look at the dissertation just to see how it all started. Mm-hmm. Because if you look at the work they're doing in mid-career, that is a lot more polished than what they came out with when they had the dissertation. So go back and look at the dissertation and find more inspiration in their work. No, it happened to me. One of the people whose dissertations I actually read for mine was Ernest Morell's. Arlette Willis said, you should read Ernest Morell's dissertation because it might give you some ideas. And it did. It gave me a lot of ideas. And it made me really feel like, this is something that is doable, and it's not that difficult. It's difficult, but it's not that difficult. And the last thing you want to do is put more hurdles than there already are on your way. So I would say, just to sum it up again, once you have made up your mind, start getting ready. You don't have to be super ready, because the doctoral program will find a way to show you that whatever you were thinking might not be the way it goes. Look at source material, model, draw inspiration from the people whose work you admire. There is no guilt in that. Actually, I think there's a lot of positive in doing that, because later on, once you become an assistant professor, those are the people who could become your colleagues. Mm-hmm. And you could end up co-authoring with them just because, you like their work so much that you just run into them, as you said in one of your videos, you run into them at a conference and you tell them, I use your work in my dissertation, and they're going to be flattered, and then you never know what's going to happen from that. And look for the resources available to you. Don't try to figure everything out on your own, because you're not supposed to. You're not supposed to get it all figured out or figure everything out just by yourself. Look for the resources available. Especially and I would say, finally, don't make any excuses for yourself. If you write in a second language, that's a difficult task, because there is a lot of negotiation with yourself. Be proud of the fact that you're doing it in a second language, and be proud of what's going to come out of your dissertation when it goes. I wanted to add that when it comes to the defense, because this is important, give yourself time to think when you're at the defense. One thing you might want to do, and this is something I do with my master students, is I always tell them to write down the questions. I always tell them, have a piece of paper, write down the question. Write down the question, and then if necessary, ask and paraphrase the question just to make sure you understood it. Because sometimes you can get lost. Sometimes, especially when you're doing video conferencing, the questions can be confusing. Or then write the question, and read it back to the committee and ask me, okay, so you're asking me to say something about this, and that. If it's correct, then it's correct. If not, I'm sure the committee will clarify it. We'll clarify, repeat the question for you, and give yourself time to think. No, I don't think, and that sometimes I would say in a defense, they're expecting you to come up with a scholarly answer, not necessarily a super quick answer. So
some of us as academics ask questions that are so long, right? That the poor student is standing there and you're like, is there a question? Or like, is this a novel? Like, the person goes on and on and on and on and on, and then they stop and you're like, so what was the
lecture question.
And that happens when I speak the language, right? Like I can, and I may not even be a student. I can be a committee member, and I can just think, what the heck do you want this person to? I don't even understand. So absolutely, make sure you're clear on it, especially when you get those long-winded lecture questions, like you said.
Yeah, write it down, and again, and always and even if you have to tell the committee, I need a moment to think. I mean, I don't think there shouldn't be, there's no penalty. You're not gonna get fewer points for saying, give me a moment. And give yourself a moment to think and organize your thoughts. Again, what the committee is expecting is a scholarly answer, an answer that shows us, the committee members, that you're someone who really has a very good grasp of the conceptual and methodological aspects of your research, of someone who really understands what they did. I mean, I think that's the main point. When we ask you questions as committee members, we want you to want to see that you really got this figured out, that you wrote a dissertation and you know what you did. And that you know, and that you can justify it, and that you can explain it in a scholarly fashion, and that you can think about the present of your work and the future ramifications of your work. So in order to give a good answer, sometimes you need to organize your thoughts. And again, there is no crime in asking for a moment. I mean, brief, obviously they don't give you the whole day, but just a brief moment to collect your thoughts together. Because sometimes, again, as you're saying, some of the questions are so long that by the time the question is over, by the time you're trying to really, you're overwhelmed by the size of the question, or by the magnitude of the person who asked the question, because sometimes that can be intimidating. Some committee members can be intimidating by their sheer persona. And they ask you a question, and you're like, you need a moment just to kind of compose yourself so you can answer the question properly. So always do that thing. Take your time to organize your thoughts. When it comes to the presentation, if you're doing this in a second language, I would say definitely rehearse it. Definitely have a rehearsal. Have a dress rehearsal, invite some of your fellow doc students, and maybe your advisor can sit there and you can go through the presentation so they can give you some feedback about, what's taking too long. Because remember, you always have a time limit. So make sure that you are within the time limit, that you're not overextending your ideas, that you're really going into the heart of the matter. And doing it once, if you need to do it twice, and do it twice. But a little rehearsal never hurts. I mean, you're never going to know what to expect from the questions, but at least you can control the presentation, so the presentation looks solid.
Yep.
And actually, in a solid presentation is going to give you confidence. It's going to boost your confidence in your language to address the questions that your committee is going to throw at you right after your presentation. And I think if you keep those in mind.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say I'm also gonna have a card pop up for the interview that I did with Echo Rivera, because she has great resources for how you make a very engaging presentation, so you're not just reading slides. So that's gonna pop up, and people can click on that to get some support for how to design effective presentations.
Yeah, and I think again, in that sense of the presentation itself, always remember this. I mean, this sounds like they tell you all the time, it's your dissertation. You did it, you wrote it, you thought it through. It's your work. Use that to build your own confidence. That you're not presenting something you haven't done anything about. You are presenting the result of 1, 2, 3 years of work, 1, 2, 3 years of your life, where you have put all this effort together. You are presenting your work, you're presenting your life. And that should be, and just say it in whatever language you feel. I mean, in terms of, you present it in English, but do it use the language in a way you feel comfortable. Because if you feel comfortable and you're saying something that really is interesting and groundbreaking, people are gonna look past the minor grammatical mistakes that you can have if you're presenting. People will probably gloss over that if what you're presenting is groundbreaking and engaging.
Yep.
So always worry about having good source material to present, and having good source material to present is going to give you the confidence to go in front of the audience and do it well. And definitely, if you keep some of those things in mind, you're gonna come to your defense. You're gonna get out the door for the deliberation, and if you do it as you're supposed to, then when they open that door, you're gonna hear those magical words that we all can't wait to hear. Congratulations, Dr. So-and-so.
Yep. Yeah, those are fantastic tips. I think, the thing to keep in mind too is that you've been admitted, you've gone through your program of study, you've done your dissertation proposal. By the time you get to actually doing the dissertation, you can do it. It's a matter of thinking about support systems that you need, and we all need them. This idea of you're going to do some things alone by yourself, but that doesn't mean you should be alone. These have been really fantastic tips, Raul. Thank you so much for taking the time to come out and share them with us.
Always happy to. Always happy to. We need to create these online spaces of support. Doctoral students sometimes are left too much to their own devices, and I think even as mid-career faculty or senior faculty, we need to be there. We need to show that we are there, and we need to show that we haven't forgotten. That is not just in the rearview mirror. That we remember,
yep.
And that remember it means that we can support, because we want you to get to where we are.
Yep. Yeah, so any questions that you have for us, please feel free to head down to the comments. Any questions that you have about, doing a dissertation, even, be it, if you're an international student or otherwise, right? Maybe you're not an international student, but you still got questions, because a lot of this is good advice that anybody can use, regardless of if they're an international student or they stayed in country to do their dissertation. So again, Raul, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my
really
pleasure.
Appreciate your time. Yeah, thank you.